With that, again, welcome to White Lives Matter, our presentation on Ragtag neo-Nazis who are searching for significance in Montana. Main speaker tonight is going to be Travis McAdam, who is the program director for combating white nationalism and defending democracy. Special guest tonight is Rabbi Lori Franklin, who is going to be sharing some information with us, and also Angelia Gonzalez Ayed, who's the executive director from the Montana Human Rights Network. And with that, I am going to turn this over to our expert on extremism, Travis McAdam.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for all of you showing up. We have kind of a running joke that sometimes when we do these webinars, we think only like my friends are going to show up, but as everybody knows, I don't have 100 friends. So clearly this got out to a lot of people. They thought it sounded interesting, and we just appreciate you taking the time to spend part of your evening with us. So yeah, as Sherilyn mentioned, in communities across the state, probably in many of the communities in which you live, people have been finding stickers for this white nationalist group called White Lives Matter. A few communities have also seen its members showing up at busy intersections, holding signs made out of bed sheets, doing what I call a racist honk and wave. And so based on that, it's not surprising that we've been fielding lots of calls, both from community members, from the media, and others, who are very concerned about the level of activity that they're seeing. So we've made this decision to hold these webinars, these extremism update webinars, every so often. And we decided that, this was a great topic to address since there are so many people thinking about it and thinking about this group right now. Oh, and now this slide always likes to hang up on me here.
That's okay, Travis. As you work on that, we'll give out one more additional content warning for late joiners. Please be aware this can be a very upsetting topic, and we do use direct clips and primary sources, including audio clips that can be very upsetting. So folks, we will endeavor to do our best to give another reminder before that information plays or is shared, but we should just consider this entire webinar as a trigger warning.
Yeah, thank you, Angelina. And who knew that would be a great time to throw in another content warning. So before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about this program area we have called Countering White Nationalism and Defending Democracy. So we do a lot of research and monitoring of these types of groups. And so this slide, that middle figure with monitoring and research, that's a key component of the work that we do. And then, the ways around it are basically how we get information. And in tonight's presentation, a lot of what you're going to hear comes from both primary sources. So we'll have clips from White Lives Matter social media. We'll have some clips from a podcast they were on. And then also tips from the community. And like Angelina and Sherilyn have said, I mean, we do just want to be very clear that, this entire presentation should really be considered under a content warning, under a trigger warning. You will hear things, you will read things that are horrible. And, as much as we try not to elevate that rhetoric, there are times and places where we feel it's important that community members really get to see and hear and understand who these groups are. When you dig past some of their, I don't like to say more polished talking points, but past kind of the public relations message that they're often trying to spread. So we're really the only organization in Montana that spends a lot of resources doing this monitoring and research work. And we've done it for the last 30 years. I mean, it was a part of why we formed. It's a part of what we've done for our entire existence as an organization, and something that we plan to do into the future. But here's the deal, like you can have all the information you want in the world, but if it just sits there and nothing's done with it, it's useless. And so that's the other thing that makes MHRN a little bit unique is that this opposition research, this monitoring, this research that we've done has always been about trying to inform the work that we do with communities, whether that's educating people, whether it helps craft strategy, even sometimes some basic logistics of organizing come out of this information. And so we'll be talking tonight about some of the work that we've already been doing around White Lives Matter. And I'll just say right now, I may start saying WLM just because it's quicker. As I mentioned, you know, a big piece of where information starts for us is often from community members. And so we have this online reporting form that you can use that we'll talk about and mention a few other times. Or you can always email us at research@mhrn.org. That gets to our research and monitoring team. But yeah, we rely on community members telling us what they're seeing as far as what's going on in their community. And as I said, this is a big part of one, how we first heard about White Lives Matter and the stickers going up, and then also thinking about how we're going to respond. Okay, so White Lives Matter, WLM, what is it? I mean, I think that's one of the first questions that we get. And to put it really simply, it is a straight up hardcore white nationalist organization. And as the activist in this little clip from the podcast that I brought up earlier says, they follow something called the 14 words. But let me play this clip for you really quick.
No,
Okay.
I meant to say we're a pro-white initiative, not an anti-non-white initiative. So basically, we stand by the 14 words that our goal is to secure the existence of our race and provide a future for white children.
Okay, so I have been doing this work for a long time. I always have to write the 14 words down, or I forget one, or I add a couple. What the 14 words refers to is this statement that says we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So these two screenshots that are on this slide show again how this group uses the 14 words. You know, it says, you should incorporate it into your clothing. Like if you're playing a sport, you should try to get number 14. Maybe put it on a hat, maybe come up with hand signals, like all of those ways of putting the 14 words forward. I think it's good to think and say, okay, like the name White Lives Matter can sound a little bit benign. And the 14 words I think comes off as creepy, but it may not make you think immediately, oh, well, this must be like a hardcore white nationalist organization.
No,
Okay.
I meant to say.
It's good to peel back that layer and look at, okay, where does the 14 words come from? So it was authored by this guy, David Lane, who was a member of the order back in the 1980s. So David Lane basically wrote and came up with the 14 words while he was serving a 190-year prison sentence for his role in assassinating a Jewish radio talk show host in Denver. And he did this while he was a member of the order. So back in the 1980s, there was this group called the Order that basically went on this campaign of domestic terrorism to fund white nationalist groups and try to jumpstart a race war. Lane met the people who would go on to found the Order at Aryan Nations gatherings over in northern Idaho in the early 1980s, and then joined up with them once the group got going. Now, the Order engaged in a real, extensive list of criminal activity. It bombed a synagogue in Boise. It robbed banks. It robbed armored cars. It basically, doing those things, accumulated millions of dollars. The group's founder, this guy named Bob Matthews, eventually would die in a shootout with law enforcement on Whidbey Island in Washington in 1984, which is where the newspaper clip on the other side, references. So Matthews becomes a martyr to the movement. David Lane goes to prison and becomes like this esteemed white nationalist figure who's looked at as a POW, a prisoner of war, a prisoner of this race war that they think is happening in America. So while he's in prison, he drafts the 14 words. He creates his own racist version of Odinism, and he pumps out all of this writing that circulated throughout the movement. And the 14 words becomes this popular slogan and a way to try to unify disparate white nationalist groups. The idea was, hey, if we can focus on the goal of saving the future for white children right now, we can worry about sorting out our differences in theology and ideology and all of those things once we come to power. So when we hear White Lives Matter talking about they are based on the bedrock principles of the 14 words, this traces back to David Lane and the Order. It traces back to one of the most violent iterations of the white nationalist movement we've seen in this country, and that is where WLM gets its founding ideology and principles. I think most people understand that when you're talking about white nationalist groups, racism is a huge component of what they're about. And this slide gives you an idea about how WLM folks talk about refugees and immigrants. And I can assure you that the attributes and the way that they talk about immigrants and refugees extends to all BIPOC folks. But it's also important to remember that anti-Semitism is a major component of white nationalist groups. And I would say that WLM doesn't necessarily lead with the anti-Semitism. It's not as readily apparent as the racism is, but it's definitely still there and a part of their overall ideology. And again, another piece that a lot of people forget is that the vast, vast majority of white nationalist groups are also incredibly anti-LGBTQ. And as we'll see throughout this presentation, that is definitely an issue that they have honed in on and are targeting. And this sound clip from that podcast features the host of the podcast and the WLM Montana activists talking about targeting churches that support equality.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if there's like a church with, you know, the poop dick flag on it, you know, like that's definitely going to be a place you're going to want to watch. I mean, I've said to people before, if you can, you know, like, if there are people, you know, even if for some reason you can't join WLM, even if for some reason, you know, you can't be an activist, frankly, you know, if you have a few spare hours and can like keep your food in your stomach, it might be worth attending these churches every once in a while just to kind of keep an eye on who's going there and who's doing what.
Yeah, we keep an eye out here local.
So I should point out that clip will kind of help going forward in that the first person that did most of the talking is the host of the podcast. And then the guy who shows up at the end and says, yeah, we try to monitor that, is a guy named Sebastian Campbell that we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. So again, White Lives Matter, it's basically a straight up hardcore white nationalist group that you see the racism, you see the anti-Semitism, you see the homophobia, and many of those other characteristics that you find in other hardcore white nationalist groups. So I keep mentioning this is the Montana chapter. They are part of a national group that claims to have chapters in almost every state. However, they're not just limited to the United States. And I realized when I put this out that like, they probably don't say they have chapters in 40 countries, but they have chapters in a bunch of countries outside the US. And if you look, picture isn't great, but over on the left is a sticker that's like ones that we have found in Montana, but this one directs people to a Telegram channel for the Netherlands chapter. But I think the thing that you can remember as I'm going forward and talking a little bit about not just their ideology, but the activities that they engage in, what the Montana chapter does, what it represents, what it's all about, is basically identical to what all of these other chapters, whether they're in the United States or in other countries, are. So you'll get a flavor for the type of activity that they're doing really all over the world.
Hey, Travis, can I interrupt you for just a second? We have a couple of questions here. We have a question about if the name White Lives Matter came about after the murder of Trayvon Martin, or if that was at another time. I'm not sure if you know that, but.
So I'll actually talk about that on this slide as far as the timing goes.
Okay, and then we had a request to turn up the volume on the podcast clips when those are played.
Okay, let me see.
Sorry, I didn't mean to slow your roll there.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'll crank this all the way up here and hopefully that helps. Okay, so we started to hear reports about WLM in Montana back in late summer, early fall of last year, when we started to hear about stickers predominantly going up in the Flathead area. And that made some sense as far as timing goes, because this national group actually formed in April 2021. And one of the things that they talk a ton about is how they are not affiliated with any previous version of an organization that has the similar or identical name. So there were previous groups that called themselves White Lives Matter that they're trying to distance themselves from. But I have to tell you, when you go back and you look at some of the earlier iterations and some that were very active around some of the Trayvon Martin, protests that these groups formed after that, when you really look at their ideology, it's basically stayed the same. I mean, a lot of the previous iterations were big into the 14 words. It's basically the same ideology, but I think that this quote unquote new national group is trying to distance itself from some of the bad press that previous iterations using this name had received. So yeah, the Montana chapter, it forms last year, and this happens to be one of the first pictures that was posted on social media by them once they got up and going. And the fact that the stickers were showing up in the Flathead area, again, made some sense, because the person who really got this chapter up and going is a guy named Sebastian Campbell. And he settled up in Kalispell in 2020 after moving from Kentucky. As you can see on the slide, he has a criminal record that includes domestic violence. And again, he was the person that got, their social media presence up and going, was really around and responsible for many of the first stickering instances that we saw, especially up in the Flathead. And really up until recently, he was doing all of the vetting for the group on social media. And here's what I mean by that. They have a main Telegram channel that they use that basically anybody can access. And then if you're interested in becoming an activist and knowing about their events and kind of going into that next level, you have to get vetted, where they try to decide, are you a spy? Are you really a Nazi? Are you really one of them? Those types of things. And then as you kind of dig below the surface, they have all of these different Telegram channels that they're using based on how much people have been vetted. So Sebastian Campbell, he was basically doing all of that up until just recently. Now he's popped up a lot of different places online. Generally, his username has included himself, referencing himself as Cletus, sometimes like Montana Cletus, sometimes other things. But so when the chapter held their racist honkin' wave in Helena back in December, Campbell allegedly pulled out a hammer and threatened a counter protester who had showed up. And so that's actually where the screenshot on the left came from. And then later on Telegram, down in the lower left there, he joked with another person about how he did carry a hammer at the event. Now, some of you who have heard me talk before, I often say that white nationalist groups don't have racist management training programs. And what I mean by that is they're not, these people get into these movements, and Sebastian Campbell is a great example. He is not a good leader. He doesn't have natural leadership skills. And thank goodness there isn't anyone to teach those to him. In fact, you can watch on Telegram where he'll get in these fights with people he's recruited into the group. And so he's not a great leader. And in a way, that means he's exactly who we would be hoping would be leading this chapter if it has to exist, because he doesn't necessarily have the leadership capabilities to make the group much bigger. So what does WLM do? Basically two primary things. So they put up stickers everywhere, and many of you have found those stickers in your communities. And then occasionally a group of them will get together at a busy intersection, hold up a big sign, and do what I call a racist honk and wave. What they do then is they take pictures while they're doing those activities that they then post on their Telegram channels as a way to try to recruit people. So like I said, we found stickers in Billings and Bozeman and Butte and Helena and Kalispell and Missoula and Great Falls and other places. They've had these honk and wave events in Helena a couple of times, in Belgrade and in Missoula. And then just a couple of weeks ago, 6 of them showed up outside the state capitol, and they demonstrated there briefly, again, to get pictures to post on social media. I think I mentioned before, right now they are very clearly in recruitment mode. And so really what they hope is somebody sees a sticker, somebody sees them out waving their banner, and they go to this Telegram channel and they get interested and they ask to be vetted and they start down that rabbit hole. That's really what their focus is right now. Okay, so then it feels like I keep going next questions. Like, okay, maybe they don't go in this order, but these are the questions that we get a lot. So how many WLM activists are there in Montana? So right now, we think the group really has about 20 to 30 activists. And we think it's important to remind people not to conflate the number of stickers that are showing up in a community with the number of activists. So in most communities, they're lucky if they have 1 or maybe 2 activists in a few communities. But the other thing we know, and not just from the honk and waves, but from some of the videos of them putting up stickers, is they also travel to support people. So that, you know, they're basically their fellow racists in other communities, both in honk and waves and putting up stickers. And the sound clip on here has Campbell, you know, talking a little bit about how that travel works.
Well, that's honestly part of the problem of doing activism in this region of the country. It's so spread out. You know, getting people to come to stuff can be difficult. Not because they don't necessarily want to, but you know, people work, people have lives, and you know, I mean, how far is it from like say the eastern side of Montana to the western side?
Yeah, it's like a 10-hour drive, depending on the road conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually about 4 hours average for folks to go to demos out of their town. We rotate it around to keep everybody from having to go every time.
Yeah.
And so Campbell talks a little bit about, yeah, how they do travel around to support each other. So I think the other thing is to remember about stickers, like one person can put up a lot of stickers in a short amount of time. And so I think that that's really one of the things we've been trying to get people to understand is don't conflate the number of stickers with the actual number of members that this chapter has. As I mentioned before, I mean, they're gonna have a tough time growing. So I already mentioned Campbell's not really a great leader. But you can also tell from their operational security that recruiting is going to be tough because they have these layers upon layers of social media chats and trying to vet people. And what that does is it makes it really hard for them to get the word out if they're going to do something, because they're trying to make sure that they're only telling people who think and agree with what they do. And then it's further complicated by the fact that they always say they will never ask for people's names or personal information. So again, that makes recruiting new members, yeah, they may get a member here or there, but it takes a lot to become an official member. And it really limits their pull as far as being able to get people to show up for their events. So back in there at their honk and wave in December of last year, they had about 10 or 12 people show up. Their capital event, they had 6 or 7. And again, by the time this Capitol event earlier this month rolled around, you had to be pretty deep into their channels of communication to find out what city they were going to be at and what location they were going to be away from. And so again, the main takeaway here that I want you to understand is that while they have a very visible presence, mostly due to the stickering, we're still talking about a pretty small group of people who are willing to travel from community to take action. And oftentimes those racist honkin' waves that I mentioned, and then we've sort of seen this, this buildup. So maybe before I do that, I should explain what I'm talking about on the slide. That might be helpful. So the national group, in some ways, was very helpful and released late in 2021 when their national days of action would be for 2022. So these are the dates. So what we've noticed here in Montana is the racist honkin' waves tend to coincide with these national days of action. We then also have noticed that as we get closer to these days of action, we tend to see an increase in the number of stickers being put up in communities. This 12 days of action, if I was, a racist PR person, I would have said, you should have come up with 14. I mean, you were telling your own members to always use the number 14. You should have come up with 2 more, but they went with 1 day every month. And it's really part of their recruiting pitch, which is you can help us save the white race. And all you have to do is guarantee that you'll show up a minimum of 1 day a month. So our perception is we will probably continue to see that pattern where in leading up to these days of actions, we'll see more stickering in communities. And then, these honkin' waves or like the demonstration they did in front of the state capitol will end up happening on these days. So why Montana? Campbell and a few of the other folks have moved here from other places. And they're constantly telling like-minded racists that Montana is a great place to live. Now, that's not a new thing. White nationalists have been saying that about Montana and Idaho and Washington and Oregon for decades. Okay, if you think about it from a historical perspective, you go back to the 1970s, Richard Butler moves up to northern Idaho from California, starts the Aryan Nations compound, and really kicked off this time of this area of the country really being thought of as a great place for either an Aryan homeland or just a safe haven for extremists in general. So you literally can go into, chat rooms, message boards, and find people all over the country talking about, oh, I would love to move to Idaho. Oh, I would love to move to Montana. And it's not because they have any connection here. They've never been here most of the time. They don't have a job. They don't have family. But it's because of this historical narrative that has gone on now for decade after decade after decade, that it's become what I like to call part of white nationalist myth and lore, that it just exists out there and is a constant pull for white nationalists, for militia members, for other extremists to this region of the country. But there are also some policy, and I guess you could call it cultural practices, for a lack of a better word, that WLM activists are using and finding very interesting. And so this is actually part of a little video, or it's a video clip from a slightly longer video that we're putting together that we're hoping to post in the next couple of weeks about the group.
And yeah, I moved up here myself June last year when all the shit was getting real bad, and I looked up the BLM protest for the town I was moving to, and it was like 10 like half Jewish, half white girls with BLM signs, and then 50 militia guys just full kitted out, open carrying ARs. They were like, yeah, no, we're here to keep the peace. Just heard there's protests going on, thought we'd show up. The laws on all sorts of things in Montana are pretty great. There's an anti-vax mandate. Employers aren't allowed to
very based
require vaccines.
Yeah, they cannot discriminate employment based on vaccination status because it is protected under HIPAA, I believe, privacy.
And you can build all sorts of things, and anything built in Montana is legal in Montana. But you know, if the feds get you, then they get you. But
Montana recently passed a constitutional concealed carry too, right? Maybe Cletus knows more about that.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
a lover, not a fighter.
Okay, so you basically have Sebastian Campbell, leader of this chapter, founder of this chapter, saying he moved up here because he saw paramilitary militia groups showing up in Kalispell in their full tactical gear, carrying their weapons, and assuming for themselves law enforcement functions during the Black Lives Matter protest up there, and didn't see any pushback from civic leaders. And that was attractive to him. You hear them talking about how Montana's lax gun laws are a big selling point. You hear them talk about how the anti-vax laws that were passed during the 2021 session are a big draw for them. And I think that this section of this podcast really kind of illustrates a couple of important things. It shows how policy and the normalizing of extremist ideologies really becomes a recruiting mechanism and makes it easy for these groups to claim that Montana is a good place to set up shop. But I think it also shows how white nationalists don't exist in a vacuum. I think a lot of people like to assume that white nationalists exist over there somewhere and the rest of us are over here. Oh, sorry, I forgot to cut that part out of the video, but the white nationalists exist over there. We're over here and there's no interaction between the two. And that is not true at all. And I think what this video clip does help show is that policy and practices of our broader communities send signals that then these groups try to capitalize on. Oops, there we go. So it's not just that they're racist honkin' waves that WLM members here in Montana have shown up in public. So back in December, a staffer for the daily newspaper in Helena sent out the tweet that's up there in the upper left about some white supremacists coming in and interrupting a meeting about resettling refugees from Afghan, and then settling Afghan refugees. And then you can see White Lives Matter's response to that tweet, taking credit for it. And Campbell talked a little bit more about that in this sound clip. Okay, if I can, there we go.
Yeah, so they're trying to bring more Afghan immigrants into Montana. We had 70 placed in Missoula, and after less than a month, they'd already raped an 18-year-old girl, kidnapped her and raped her in the hotel room. So we went to protest that, and they only released the date through a church that had like trans and gay flags in there. So most of the meeting was just the people who go to that church, and we only were able to get a few guys together to go to it, but we were there. They yelled "Stop White Replacement" out a couple times, and then left because they were going to get escorted out at that point. But the cops didn't even. There was a few cops in there, and they didn't do nothing or even move towards the guys. We stayed masked up. Always stay anonymous as possible.
Okay, so what you hear there is Campbell parodying a lot of what I would call the normal white nationalist talking points about refugees and immigrants, that they're all criminals, they're all violent, all sorts of bigoted claims that way. So they showed up just, at this community meeting about refugee resettlement, disrupted it, and left. They also showed up back in September, October-ish, 2021, up in the Flathead when some militia groups tried to basically orchestrate a standoff up in the Somers area. So long story short, you've got this developer, Dennis Thornton, took out a big loan to do a development. He failed to live up to the terms of the development. The credit union took the land and his equipment back. He fought this in the courts and he lost. But the Montana Daily Gazette, which is basically the extremist blog in the state, picked up his story and ran with it. So they eventually covered Thornton, quote unquote, reclaiming his property by cutting the locks off of the gates, which is what's being shown in this picture. And then working with Ammon Bundy's militia-based group called People's Rights, tried to basically set up a camp on that property, and were trying to orchestrate a situation that they could blow up into an armed standoff, which again is what Ammon Bundy and the Bundy family is best known for. Now, thankfully, it turned out that they couldn't really get people to show up, but two of the very few people that did show up were activists with this WLM chapter in Montana. So video shot at the camp and posted online showed a couple of the WLM members palling around with leaders of Ammon Bundy's group. And again, that's not surprising when you consider Campbell talking about militias being a reason that he was drawn to this area. I'll also note that that's really part of a little bit of a broader trend that we've seen around the region, which is for a long time, militia groups and other right-wing extremists would often kick out white nationalists. And it was either because they found their views reprehensible, or more likely, they didn't want the bad press that came from being associated with white nationalists. But we're seeing more and more the groups are willing to work with white nationalists out in the open. And I think that, this was an example of that. Okay, so what have we been doing in response to WLM up to this point? First, we've really been encouraging the media not to cover every time a sticker shows up in their community where the media is based. So not only does coverage like that end up being free advertising for the group, but it plays into this problem of, again, conflating the number of stickers with how big and influential the group is. Now, we understand that we obviously don't have control over what the media does or doesn't cover. And so we've also been encouraging them, if you are going to cover White Lives Matter, that they talk to us, they talk to other organizations that can really provide that needed context and analysis about what the group is, what it's about, what it's doing, and what it wants. And then we've really been stressing that if the media does cover stickering, that they don't post or print pictures of the stickers, because again, all that does is elevate their message. The Telegram channels that they're using for recruitment are on the stickers. And so by publishing that in the paper or putting it, in a broadcast story, all it's doing is not just perpetuating their literature, but it's also helping to spread their main recruitment mechanism. So since we're encouraging the media not to cover every stickering that happens, we still think it's important that people know what's going on. And so we've been trying to do a lot of individual outreach to the communities that are generally targeted the most by white nationalist groups. So we've been trying to reach out to the BIPOC community, the Jewish community, to the LGBTQ community, let them know when these days of action are coming up, giving them updates about the WLM chapter here and its activities. We're continuing to, try to build that list out so that, the folks that really need the information are still getting the information if the media isn't covering it. We've also been helping to develop a network of people in these towns where the stickers have been going up that go out and take the stickers down as soon as possible. So one of the only benefits to them posting videos and pictures on social media of them putting up stickers is oftentimes in communities you can figure out where they are and you can go and take them down. So if their primary recruitment tool is putting these stickers up, the quicker we can get them taken down, the better. And Sherilyn is actually going to talk a little bit more here in a bit about that whole process. And I guess I really want to stress, I've talked about how there's small numbers, especially compared to the amount of stickers that they're putting up, that they're not a big group, that, Sebastian Campbell may not be a great leader. But I also want to be clear, it's not like we are happy about this at all. We are very concerned, because here's the deal. We've been doing this for 30 years. We have watched other groups come along and do stickers and do literature drops and kind of be in this recruitment mode that WLM is in right now. The problem is, once they've had a little bit of success doing that, they tend to escalate their activity. And that's when you really start to see either individual community members or constituencies within the community that start being harassed and threatened. And in some case, in those worst case examples, you start to see white nationalists acting in a violent way. So while, we're definitely trying to give perspective to how big the group is and that it's not a big group, we also are trying to also communicate that we are concerned about what this group may do long-term and what happens if they're having success recruiting people and they start to escalate. And those are concerns, as I mentioned, we've seen with groups in the past, and that we continue to be very worried about with WLM right now. So far, Missoula hasn't been hit as hard as some of the other communities with the WLM stickers. However, a couple of years ago, there was this time period where anti-Semitic flyers and graffiti were showing up repeatedly, and it felt like month after month. And both the impact of those flyers and the community response that happened because of them, we think is a really great thing to keep in mind right now. And so I want to turn it over to our board member from Missoula, Rabbi Lori Franklin, to talk about that time in Missoula and what she witnessed with how it impacted communities and eventually how the community came together. So you get a break from me. You're welcome. And I'll turn it over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Travis. And I want to just say how much I appreciate your presentation, because even though I'm a board member, I'm an MHRN, I don't always have all of the most up-to-date material. So thanks to everybody also for being here and listening as well. So what I wanted to tell you is a story about some things that happened in 2019, and we can't draw a straight line from those events to White Lives Matter in Montana today, although some people involved in those incidents may in fact be involved today. We don't know. But I think that what's important to understand is that when there is a series of events that are follow close on each other as a flurry, as they did between January and March of 2019. Altogether, maybe 15 incidents that I'm aware of, and there may have been others that weren't reported to me. It's as I've learned, it's a kind of low-level terrorism. It puts people on edge. It makes them concerned that they are being watched and threatened by those who are doing this activity, and the sense of not knowing is unnerving. So let me just give you a little background here. There were neighborhoods around Missoula that were leafleted, as well as Target Range and nearby Lolo, Montana. So Linda Vista, Pleasant View, Franklin to the Fort, the University residential area, Lewis and Clark, Northwest area of South Russell, and the University of Montana campus. 6 Missoula churches had Jew hatred flyers taped to their doors: the UCC, First Pres, First United Methodist, Grace United Methodist, St. Paul Lutheran, and St. Francis. And there was also graffiti on a prominent location, a motel wall on West Broadway, which resulted in arrests by the police. And there was also a graffiti incident in a bathroom at Hellgate High School. So what was the content? Well, the graffiti on the motel was pretty standard neo-Nazi stuff. White power, it said, swastikas, and it had the numeral 88 representing Heil Hitler being the eighth H being the 8th letter of the alphabet. And leaflets had messages about Jews attacking the First Amendment, about circumcision, about Jews desiring to control Christians and create a new world order. There were anti-Trump images labeled, quote, Zionist bitch and pedophile, and images saying, I didn't join the military to die for Israel. And this is not a complete list. It's quite a grab bag of messages, and they may have well come from different sources, some having that standard sort of neo-Nazi stuff, and others decidedly anti-Israel, others appearing to recruit Christians against Jews, direct attacks on Jewish practice. So how did it affect people? How did they feel? I got telephone calls from folks who found these leaflets that very morning on their doorsteps and were so upset. They were not being targeted directly because, as Jews, although these were Jews calling me for the most part, because it seems that their neighbors also got these leaflets, and so it was a kind of a random leafleting in a particular area. But nonetheless, they were so concerned that people were kind of creeping around their doorsteps in the early dawn hours to escape detection, and that there was this activity literally at their doorstep. Somebody who had, was holding them in disregard was on their doorstep. And there was at least one very indistinct doorbell camera image that was shared with local police, but it was very inconclusive in identifying those who were distributing the leaflets. In fact, that was 2019, and those doorbell camera recorders were not as ubiquitous or as effective as they are now. But still, we did have some images. Most people were surprised to learn that the police would not act on these incidents because leafleting, this kind of hate leafleting, fell under the banner of free speech, and especially because it appeared to be random and not targeting individuals because of being Jewish. And despite the fact that the leafleters were entering private property to distribute them. The only prosecutable event was the motel graffiti because it involved destruction of property, what we commonly call vandalism, and what is described legally as malicious mischief, which results in damage that has a dollar value. And in addition, because the motel graffiti contained an anti-Jewish slur, the city could tag on a hate crime enhancement because it was both cost money to do the repair and was a hate message. So, but there is no hate crime law in the state. So there's no legal basis for charging anyone unless there is accompanying property damage or associated physical assault, in which case then a hate crime enhancement can be added as another charge. I spoke with our local police who were quite helpful and who explained to me in face-to-face meetings the legality of leafleting, the lack of the hate crime law, the legal tool of the hate crime enhancement when there's been property damage or assault. So what happened in the greater community? I called the mayor. We convened a local group of clergy, both Jewish and pastors of the leafleted churches. The mayor supported us to create what was intended as an inaugural public event celebrating diversity, which took place at Caris Park, underwritten by the mayor, called Missoula Together. And it was a small event, decidedly intimate, but it was actually very lovely, with different ethnic, immigrant, arts, and religious groups of Missoula participating. And that was fall 2019. As we all know, the pandemic came on, and that put a stop to planning a follow-up event both in 2020 and in 2021. I was also invited to Big Sky High School in Missoula for Diversity Week to talk about how to organize a positive response to attacks on one's ethnicity or religion. And then with MHRN leadership, I also wrote an op-ed to the Missoulian. Also visited with the then Missoula County Public Schools superintendent in spring 2019 and talked about ways that we might enhance diversity awareness in the Missoula County Public Schools, as I had heard from Jewish parents that kids were hearing and seeing anti-Semitic messages at school. And I also had conversations with Native and BIPOC parents and learned that Native kids, biracial kids, kids of color were regularly taunted at school. This was sort of an ongoing low-level unpleasantness. And with the transition to Superintendent Rob Watson, the effort picked up steam, and the I-Value group of Missoula County Public Schools took form, and it is active today to address hate activity in the schools through positive education. So I-value is an acronym for inclusion, validation, action, learning, understanding, equity. And I-value sponsored one teaching and community training in 2021, 4 sessions, perspectives on identity, creating culturally safe communities, interrupting oppression, strategies for individual and community change, and is about to mount a second series of these. And it also issues periodic newsletters to MCPS educators. So in conclusion, what's our role going forward? Vigilance, reporting what we see, advocacy, showing up for each other, communication, developing allies, and creating opportunities for education. And it's our job to promote diversity publicly as a positive community value. And we also need to work towards affecting policy and procedure in organizations that we're part of, and also affecting law. So I think that'll give you a little bit of a taste of what we saw here and in Missoula, and how a community can organize to address some of these things. And thank you so much for the chance to share this information with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori. We really appreciate that. Let me try to get this going here again. So I think Lori brings up, covers a lot of what is on this slide. And I think that first, the law enforcement piece. So I want you all to know that law enforcement is aware of what's going on with White Lives Matter. They are aware of who the major players are, and they are concerned about what is going on. Now, that level of knowledge and that level of concern can vary from, locality to locality, but I will say, that there are many folks in the law enforcement community in Montana that have that information, and that we continue to share that information as often as we can. But I think one of the things that Lori mentions that's so important is we can't just think of this as a law enforcement problem. And what I mean by that is, you'll hear people say, well, all we need is for the cops to go out and arrest these people. And I think that, Lori's point about a lot of this type of activity falling into an area that is, First Amendment speech in some cases is an issue. And honestly, in some areas, like there isn't a local ordinance that's broken. And honestly, even if there is, it can be a challenge to get local law enforcement to devote resources to really going after this. So we can't just think of it as a law enforcement issue. We do really encourage people, though, to file reports with local law enforcement. It is really important to have that paper trail going. And frankly, even some departments that, are not necessarily looking like they're out there trying to figure out who's doing it. They want to know it's happening. They want to know if there are patterns. They want to know where things are happening. So we continue to encourage people, to file reports with law enforcement, and just know that there are allies in the law enforcement community that are aware of what's going on and are very concerned and are watching it closely. But I think that Lori's point is a very good one from that experience, that it's up to us as communities to speak out and denounce white nationalism and extremism. Some of you may have heard I say sometimes in presentations, like, every day is a good day to denounce white nationalism. And so we can all do that in our personal capacities. We can, do it on social media. We can do it in LTEs or through similar actions. You can ask your friends to do similar things. But again, I would encourage you not to post pictures of the stickers or the literature, or whatever the case may be, online when you're doing that, because again, that helps circulate the content. So think more in terms of describing and condemning the content, not helping to circulate their literature. You can work with friends, you can put on events. These days we've been encouraging virtual events, but to educate your community about these issues and what's going on. You can get in touch with MHRN, and I see some of you have already been doing that. If you want to become part of this network, to go out and take stickers down. My point is, there are a lot of different things that we as individuals, and even more so, we as communities can do to make it clear that WLM and such groups will not have a home in our communities. There's also the piece about asking local officials to condemn these groups in very public ways. This can be through city council members, mayors, whoever it might be, making personal statements. It can be them working together to pass resolutions, but it's really important to have local leaders condemning these messages and condemning these groups. Let's think back. Part of the reason that Sebastian Campbell moved here was because he saw militia folks in full gear turning out in the community without any sort of local official saying anything. It's important that our local officials, our local leaders are vocal in opposing these groups. And to that end, our friends at Western State Center recently put out this guide that's pictured on this slide that has some ideas of what local leaders and local officials can think about doing in response to anti-democratic activity, which obviously includes white nationalism. We've talked a lot about, this network of people taking down stickers. I want to turn it over to Sherilyn right now to talk a little bit more about that activity and what that's looked like.
Okay, turns out I have to turn on my camera and unmute myself. Who knew, huh? Okay, so what you're seeing here, and one of the questions we had asked is somebody said, what stickers, what stickering is happening? And so like Travis said before, what's happening, the reason we know about what's happening actually is that White Lives Matter supporters and activists are posting pictures of themselves putting up their own stickers in different locations around Montana. And so we're showing you an example here. So this piece on the left with the cowgirl sitting there, this is kind of a typical sticker. A lot of them have like retro or vintage images, kind of like, oh, don't you wish we could go back to the good old days of white supremacy? And so it has this kind of vintage picture to kind of pull you in and say, oh, well, what's this about? And then once you get up closer, the racist message is fairly clear. There aren't just one, there are a bunch of different ones, but they all feature usually a vintage image and then the White Lives Matter tag and then a QR code. And so you may see them, they've been hitting towns, cities across Montana, Billings, Great Falls, Kalispell, Missoula, Belgrade, lots of different locations. And what we want to caution you to do, the reason we have the big X over it to the side there, is because if you see these, we would like you to take a picture for yourself and then report it to us, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how to do that in just a second. But we really, really, really want to caution you not to share these on social media. I know it's tempting to kind of put these on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter and say, oh my gosh, what's happening to our town? We've seen a couple of examples where this has happened, and what ends up happening is it's free advertising to people. It's free advertising for the group so that they get their name out. They are searching for posts where they are mentioned, and then they either amplify it or they will send White Lives Matter supporters into the comments if it's a public post, so that they can flood the comments with things like, well, why can't we say all White Lives Matter. Why is that a problem? That just seems like a normal thing. And I've seen this kind of fall apart in the comments several times. So either you get like this mini troll storm around the post, or you will get all sorts of comments that sort of normalize this horrible agenda. And so please, 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 if you see one of these, report it to us. Do get a picture first so we know where it is. So, but do not post it on social media because it's just going to attract the wrong attention. So Travis, you can go ahead to the next slide there. Okay, so what can you do? You can go to this link that says MHRN reporting form, and we're having a bit of a glitch with our website right now. As you can imagine, we are talking about White Lives Matter and other extremists, and so they are hitting our website really hard right now. And we found a couple glitches, so not all of the links work, but we do have this reporting form working right now. And so you can go to our hate reporting and response, and that's at mhrn.org. And then once you click on report here, it will pull up the form that you see on the right-hand side. And so it says confidential reporting of incidents of discrimination, harassment, and violence. That comes directly to Travis, and then he forwards it to different areas. Like if it's a situation that needs to be handled for Great Falls, it goes one place. Kalispell, Flathead Valley, I handle those. And you can give us as much information as you want, or you can make it anonymous. It's all up to you. But what's really important for us is that we know what kind of sticker it is, where it's located. And if we have that information, then we can contact officials or volunteers in that area so that we can go and take those stickers down right away. Now, the reason we ask for reporting first is because not every municipality or location is okay with volunteers taking down stickers. Some are fine. Some are just like, great, if you see those, just take them right down and we don't have a problem with it. But other municipalities and parks and recs departments are concerned about damage to signs or property, and so they would prefer to send their own workers out or officials out to take care of it. But if you send that, you don't have to figure that out. If you see something, report it to us and we'll put it out from there. I put in the chat, someone said, how can we volunteer to take stickers down? Send your name, email, and location to research@mhrn.org, and then we can put you on a list for your community, and when a sticker goes up, we can contact you and tell you how to take it down, and you can do that. I'm looking at some of the Q&A things here, and I don't think these are for me. Oh, so are stickers different from flyers? Someone asked. So Lori, Rabbi Lori answered this really well. I'll just answer this quickly and then we will move on. But stickers are usually smaller and they are adhered to a surface, sometimes a flat surface, sometimes light poles, sometimes signs, sometimes traffic signs, wherever they think people are going to see them. And flyers are usually like tucked in door handles, under doormats. In stores, we have seen, like, as shop owners have reported that, like, some people have found flyers in pockets of merchandise, like clothing that's hanging in there, or inside books. And so that's the difference between stickers and flyers. And with that, I think I am going to send things over here to Angelina Gonzalez-Ayed, our executive director, to talk about some of the things that we're doing to counter white nationalism and White Lives Matter in Montana.
Yeah, thanks, Sherilyn. So we're going to throw some links into the chat for you. You might want to click through these, make sure they open on a browser. and bookmark them for later because they will disappear after this webinar ends. Sherilyn will also send them out by email so that you can all access them. But our website is mhrn.org. I have some exciting updates about that. On occasion, our website does go down. It turns out that we have quite a few number of enemies who really like to burn our time by attacking our website. They've successfully gotten us deprioritized on SEO. So Google, if you type us into Google, our website doesn't come up right away. So we do have a website. On occasion, it goes down, but we usually get it back up pretty quick. So mhrn.org will get you to there. Travis and Sherilyn also worked up a really great blog post that is available on our website. We'll throw that link in the chat as well that provides some more detailed information in case you want to read about it more or send that information on to someone else. If you ever need to get in touch with our research team, even if it's just a question or you see something in your community that you would like to discuss with someone, we are available to you for that. And you can reach us by just emailing research@mhrn.org. That goes to all three of us right away. We're usually pretty quick to respond. And then that online reporting form, that's going to be our last link. That's if you want to submit things anonymously through the website. You don't feel like emailing research, but really either one of those ways is a great way to get us, a copy of a picture of a sticker or a flyer or something that's come up that you have some questions about. So please keep those links handy. We will send them out probably sometime tomorrow. But if you ever need to reach us, these are probably the best ways. And we do encourage you all to share some more information like that blog post with your friends and family members so that others are really aware of what's going on, because it is important that we remind folks that this is a real and present danger, but it's a lot smaller than they would like for us to think that they are. And they are working overtime to try and inflate their presence in communities. And that can really make BIPOC folks, Black and Indigenous folks, and other marginalized community members feel really vulnerable. So making sure that we're keeping track of their activity is a top priority for us. So thank you all for joining us. We're gonna head into Q&A pretty quick, but I thought I would also share just some general updates on things that are going on at the network. 2022, I know we're just 2 months into it, but it has been very, very busy, especially for Travis and Sherilyn. Extremist activity brought on by the pandemic, we're still fighting over masks and schools, has brought a lot of anti-science, anti-government, and pro-militia protests to school boards, health boards, and local governments across the state. We're seeing it, and the region as well. It's not just us, we're seeing it nationally, but it's definitely happening in Montana as well. So to keep pace with this, we have really exciting plans to expand programming and improve communications platforms, including a new website that should be more secure and less prone to extremist attacks and hackers later this year. So that's really exciting. We've seen a lot of activity aimed at queer books at local school boards and libraries. And these book challenges are an excellent example of how human rights issues intersect and overlap in really complicated and quick moving ways. The rise in efforts to ban specific topics from K-12 curriculum and even from libraries, banning books from libraries. It almost always pertains to books about LGBTQ plus people and books about race and racism. This is just part and parcel of longstanding efforts by extremist groups to use public education and these small local political or public institutions as political battlegrounds. So if you hear of anything going on at your school board, at your library, at your local community, please let us know. While we do our absolute best to track activities, we are still a small team, and it's a great help to get information direct from communities. So if in doubt, please reach out. We are here to help, and I think we will get into some Q&A now. So if my fellow panelists would join me, I think we'll go through any unanswered questions or provide some additional elaboration. But Again, thank you all to everyone for joining us this evening. We appreciate your presence here. It means the world to us.